there guys, and welcome back. In this week's show we're going to continue with the final part 4 of our picture frame tutorial. So last week we finished off the show with clamping up the frame and aligning everything and making sure that everything was alright with it. This has been sitting in the clamp now for several days, and we'll just release it from the clamp. Sometimes the squeeze out in the corners will make the corners stick to the frame, but at this point there's nothing to worry about with that. So there's our frame. It looks really great. I love it. The miters are nice and tight all the way around. If I wanted to be brave at this point in time, I could slap a square on it to show you whether or not they're perfect and whether or not this equals 90 degrees. You know what? Let's be brave. I think I'll do that. Let me grab a square. You know, they say if you're gonna talk the talk, you better walk the walk. And so here's our 45. And we've got a square, and we'll just sit it on here and check. And I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that is right on the money at 90 degrees. There is no variance whatsoever. That is bang on. And that is all coming back to taking the time to do your 45s correctly and to ensuring that your miter gauge on your table saw is set correctly. So there you go. Throw caution into the wind on a video here, and 90 degrees on every side. Not bad. So thus far on this picture frame we've done 0 sanding. Well, now at this point in time, now we want to take the sander to it. So what I've got is my oscillating sander here. I've got a 120 grit disc on it. And we just want to run around the surfaces of the frame, just taking off any rough spots and any irregularities. Most importantly will be where the miters are. Sometimes what happens is you might have a little raised edge. Like I can feel that this corner over here is raised ever so slightly above, maybe a 32nd or a 64th if that. We just want to level this out. And then we'll do the same on the back side. At this point in time too, if you wanted to do a little bit of hand sanding on this inner profile, that you could do as well. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this up, and then we'll move on with the next step. Okay, well, I've sanded all the flat surfaces, or the face surfaces, on both the front and the back, sanded right down to 220, and I've also sanded the inside routed profile here on the front face of the frame. I did not do any sanding along these edges. The reason being is that we still haven't routed the outside profile, and I really didn't want to change or alter this flat surface, so that I didn't want the bearing of the router bit to translate any deviances in the flatness of this frame. So for now I've left this here unsanded and all outside edges unsanded, because at this point in time they are straight and true. So we're going to leave that like that. Now we're going to move on to the next step, which will be to cut and glue in the splines on the corner miters. So in order to cut the splines, I use this table saw and this spline jig that I've made. And all a spline jig really is I've got some 5/8 plywood here, and I've got some 3/4 MDF that are both mitered at 45, and then they're set and screwed onto this backer board in such a configuration that this equals 90 degrees. Sorry, this here equals 90 degrees. So what we end up with is a jig where your frame can sit in this little nook of your spline jig, and it can be up against your table saw fence and run through with the blade slicing through to cut the slot for your spline. So I'm going to show you how that works. I've got the table saw set up with a ripping blade, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to cut the splines, or the grooves for them, in each of the four corners of this particular picture frame. So the first thing that you want to do here is you want to set the height of your blade. So with the back of your frame facing out so that you can see the height of your blade, you want to adjust it. Adjust your blade height so that it's going to cut through a half decent part, but you want to make sure that you're not cutting into this section of your frame, because that would be disastrous at this point. So about halfway. You want to go about midway between the tip of the frame and this point. So right around here is where you really want to be with your spline cut. It's not a deep cut, but it'll definitely strengthen your frame once you get the spline glued in. So I like that height there, and that's where we're going to start with at that point. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to mark where you want your spline to be, and I've marked the center line and then the two outer cut lines on my frame. Now I'm using 1/8 of an inch thick maple for this, but you could do whatever you like. You could, use 3/16 or even quarter inch, whatever you want. It's your frame, but for me, I just want a 1/8 inch thick spline right there. And we're going to set up our table saw now so that the blade strikes at either the left or the right mark, one or the other. So we have the height of our blade set, we have our fence set for where we want our cut. Now we need to clamp our frame into our spline jig. Don't be thinking that you can hold this by hand. You really want your hands to be controlling the jig, not holding onto the frame. So with that now, we're going to go ahead and make our first pass in the frame for our spline. And there it is. There is our first cut. From there now we will continue by rotating the frame to cut all four corners. Now because the kerf of the blade is not 1/8 of an inch thick, we're going to have to inch our fence in a little bit to complete the cut on all four corners. But bottom line is, just like we did with the dados to put in our inlays, we're going to make several passes to make a 1/8 inch thick spline groove. So I'm going to carry on with that, and then we're going to come back and glue in the splines. We have all of our spline grooves cut, and at this point in time what you want to do is take your material that you're going to use for your spline, and you want to test it in each and every single slot. It should slide in easily but not be sloppy. It should be snug. You don't want to use a mallet to bash it in. You just want to be able to slide it in and give room for there to be glue in there to work. Now from here I like to mark out my splines, and by doing that I just basically sit it into the groove, and I just draw a rough line like that, and I take these over to the scroll saw and cut these different triangles out. So I'm going to mark all four onto this board, and then I'm going to take them over to the scroll saw, cut them out, and we're going to glue them in. So the next step, now that we have our splines all cut, is we want to glue them in. Excuse me. So we'll start with this one here. And you basically want to make sure that you've got some Q-tips on hand for cleanup of the squeeze out. You've got some quick grips or some form of clamp here as well to clamp the corner once you get the spline in. But the general gist of it here is to give the spline a little coating of glue on each side. Now you don't need a lot of glue here, but you want enough that it's going to be fully coated, and basically its purpose is it's going to strengthen that miter joint because it's going to fill in all the spaces of the miter. So you get her coated up with glue and slide it in, give it a good pressing in there, make sure that it's seated really, really well. One thing I didn't coat here, and I should have, I apologize. You want to coat this end of it as well. Make sure that it gets glued in there. Sorry about that. Anyway, get her pushed in there, get her glued in nice and tight. When you get it glued in, don't think that this is going to be a clean process, because that ain't happening. Get a quick grip on there and give it a good clamp. From there, you want to make sure that you get a wet Q-tip and just clean up all this excess squeeze out here of the spline. So I'm going to carry on now and clean up the rest of that squeeze out, and once I get it cleaned up and looking pretty, I will glue in the other 3 splines, and I'll show you guys where we're at that point in time. So bear with me. This isn't a quick process, but that's one pretty much glued in. 1 down, 3 to go. See you after that. Okay, so we've got all the splines glued in and they're all clamped. You really want to do as good of a cleanup around these splines as you can at this point. It'll save you a lot of hassle of sanding later on. But for now, we got to leave this overnight. Let that glue set, make sure those splines are perfectly in place and fully cured, and you know, a night, even 2 nights. So I'm going to get back to this in a couple days, and I'll continue on, and through the magic of video, of course, there won't be a time lapse for you, but we're going to leave this for 1 if not 2 nights. So I'll see you after that. So it's been several days. Things have been clamped up. Everything is dry, everything is good, but as you can see here, the splines sit extremely proud of the frame. So at this point in time, what we need to do is we need to trim these splines flush to the walnut frame. There's several methods you could use. You could sand them flush, again, bandsaw, flush cut saw, but I'm going to use the scroll saw because for me that's where I get the most control. So I'm going to take them over and cut these splines flush, and then we'll go from there. So when cutting these splines off, I've drastically oversized the blade on my scroll saw. This material here, I would normally use a number 2 or at largest a number 3 blade to cut, but I've got a number 7 in. And the reason I use a number 7 is because I like to ride, this is an exaggeration here, but I like to ride the spine of the blade and cut the spline off. That way I'm not digging into the material. And again, like I said, this is an exaggerated angle of what I'm showing you here, but you get the gist of it. And you can see there that I've cut that one flush, and it doesn't look too pretty right now, of course, but that will change with the final sanding of the edges. So I'm going to carry on and cut the rest of these splines off, and then we'll move on to the next step. So we've got all the splines cut, and they're cut flush to the frame. Now we're going to give it a little light sanding with our quarter sheet sander. You don't want to go too crazy on the sanding, you just want to clean it up a bit. And then after that we're going to get into routing the outside edges of this frame. So all of the splines have been sanded flush to the frame, and I just want to show you guys something to be aware of. And yeah, it's a mistake on my frame, but I'm not too concerned about it. So if you look up here at this picture, what you're seeing here is about a 1/32 of an inch gap between the spline and the slot that you cut for it. And what caused that is I didn't get the spline all the way into the slot to sit flush right to the very back of that slot, and it caused a gap. Now, I mean, I'm not too concerned about this at this point in time. I've come this far to turn back. I'll just put that mistake at the bottom of the frame. But for you guys, if you want to make sure that your first frame, or if you're following this tutorial and you want your frame to be perfect, it's something to be aware of, that the spline has to be right into the slot all the way in, so that you don't get this, and instead what you get is this. Alright, so we're in the home stretch of this one, and this right now could be left just the way it is and it would be perfectly acceptable, other than, you know, you want to put a nice finish on it because that'll really darken up the walnut and really show the contrast between the maple and the walnut. But I think that I'd like to soften these outer edges just a touch. When I compared the 1/4 inch round over bit, which is the one, if you remember, that I used on this inside profile, when I compared that to the corners of the frame, if I use that bit, I'm actually going to cut into the splines. So I'm going to go with a little softer profile, and I'm going to use a 1/8 inch round over, and I'm going to run it all the way around the front and the back outside of the frames, just to soften it, and then we're going to give it a hand sanding. All right, so what have we got? We've got our outside profiles routed to 1/8 inch round over, and I've sanded it down to 220. That's pretty smooth. You really don't have to go any further than that. If you wanted to go further on the sanding, I guess you could. But either way, this is a fantastic looking frame. It feels great. The edges feel great. It's extremely professional looking with the splines and the inlays. But to make it even more professional looking, what we're going to do now, instead of using brad nails to hold it in, as I said in one of the other episodes, I like to use photo turns. And I'm just going to show you those here quickly, and a couple of the hangers that you could use on your frame. So as I said before, I like to use photo turns, and if you're not sure what they are, they look like this. They're little brass cutouts, and they screw to the back of your frame to hold your photos in. So I'm going to show you now how it is that they mount. This might be a little difficult to do, but this is our mock-up pieces of plexi, and of course our item that we're framing, and then of course our backer board. And you can see here that this sits flush. So with the photo turns, all you would want to do is sit them on the back as such, and you would drill a pilot hole, very important in this case. Number one, because they adhere with brass screws, which are very soft and can twist off on you. And as well, because you're close to this edge, you really don't want to split your wood now that your frame is finished up. But I like to put 2 on each side, evenly spaced. And you want to space them just to make it that much more professional. Take your time and space them evenly from the edge of your frame or from the outside edge, either or. But as you get your photo turns put around and screwed in, it's a very professional look in my opinion. If you want it to use brad nails, as I said before, then the depth of this rabbet would have to be quite a bit deeper. One of my favorite types of hangers to use on these picture frames, and you could use sawtooth hangers or whatever you like, but this here is one of my favorites, and they work really well for my application. They're rather inexpensive, and you know, you can get them at even your local big box store sells these, but you know, give these a try if you're interested in making your frames look that much more professional. I would suggest the photo turns and the brass hangers. And of course, the final step for me in any one of my projects is to brand them. If you guys don't brand or mark it or date it, it really should be. It tells the history of your woodworking, your successes, your failures, and it shows how much your skills have increased over the years just by looking at the dates on the back. So, as with every other project that I do, like I said, final stage, the brand. And there you have it. We're finally done this one, guys. Week 4, I would like to see it done on week 3, but like I said before, we're not in a rush, and there was just way too much information for me to do it in 3. I would have had to cut things out, and I really didn't want to do that. So thanks for hanging in there. I hope it's helpful to some of you guys, and I hope that you go ahead and make some picture frames of your own. Key tips: take your time, check your equipment, verify your 45s, and just have fun with it. I mean, that's what it's all about. So make your own picture frames. Hopefully you'll find something prettier than this to put in it. Guys, thanks for watching, and I will see you again next week with another woodworking video. I know I said I was done, but I just want to show you guys one last thing, and that is the difference that a finish makes. One quick coat of Danish oil on this, and the frame has gone from this, which was pretty nice in its own rights, to this. Absolutely gorgeous. Love the contrast, love the way it looks. Of course, I'm going to finish up with this. I'm not sure if I'm going to put some shellac or some poly on it, or maybe just do a hand rub finish. Either way, looks fantastic. Walnut and maple, beautiful contrast. Thanks again for watching, guys.